For centuries, historians, treasure hunters, and archaeologists have been chasing one of the greatest missing fortunes in world history, Attila the Hun's legendary treasure. But what exactly was this treasure? Why did it vanish? And is there real evidence that it still exists? Today we solve the mystery buried beneath myth, fear, and fragmented history. Imagine an empire built not on marble and libraries, but on thunderous horsemen who conquered cities in days and vanished just as quickly. Imagine a ruler so feared that Rome paid him mountains of gold just to keep him away. And then imagine all that gold disappearing overnight after his death. This is the story of Attila's hidden treasures, an enigma that has baffled scholars for generations. Are they buried beneath a river? Locked inside lost burial chambers? Or were they scattered across Eurasia, waiting to be uncovered by the next fortunate explorer? Today, we dive into the gold, relics, and artifacts that once defined the power of the Huns and reveal where Attila's treasure might truly be hiding. Throughout the ancient world, few figures inspired more awe, terror, and fascination than Attila the Hun, a ruler whose wealth became as legendary as his armies. When storytellers, diplomats, and historians spoke of him, they didn't simply describe a warrior king. They described a man who commanded rivers of gold, mountains of tribute, and treasure caravans that stretched for miles. Yet the most intriguing part of Attila's wealth isn't its size, its mystery surrounding how he acquired it, how he controlled it, and what ultimately happened to it. To understand Attila's treasure, you first have to travel back to the 5th century, a world where empires were trembling and borders were crumbling. Rome, once unshakable, was bleeding from internal corruption and relentless invasions. Its leaders desperately needed peace they could no longer secure with armies alone. Instead, they paid for safety with gold, and Attila made sure he collected every ounce. Ancient diplomats wrote that the Roman Empire sent him tribute so massive that it strained their economy, and yet Attila demanded even more. When he walked into negotiations, he didn't speak like a barbarian chief. He spoke like someone who understood leverage, fear, and economics better than the Romans themselves. Every treaty, every meeting, every threat was a transaction. When Rome hesitated, Attila sent his armies riding across their borders, burning their cities and reminding them exactly who held the power. The Romans paid thousands of pounds of gold each year just to keep him from destroying their lands. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't charity. It was protection money given to the man they feared most. But Attila's treasure wasn't built on Roman gold alone. His empire stretched across the Carpathian Basin, where trade routes from the east and west met like intersecting veins of wealth. Silk Road caravans carrying spices, furs, silk, weapons, and precious metals all passed through territories under his control. Traders paid taxes, tolls, and sometimes bribes simply for the privilege of moving through Hun lands. Attila understood trade better than many settled rulers. He didn't need sprawling cities. He didn't need ports. He had something stronger, mobility and absolute dominance over everything that passed across the plains. As his empire expanded, Attila also absorbed the wealth of conquered tribes. Gifts poured into his encampment as lesser rulers sought alliances or begged for mercy. Horses, weapons, gold ornaments, ritual vessels, rare gemstones, everything flowed toward the center of power. Even his own elite warriors presented offerings to him, cementing loyalty and ensuring their place in the hierarchy. This wasn't just personal treasure. It became a treasury that fueled his military machine, supplied his vast network of alliances, and reinforced his image as a ruler favored by destiny. What makes Attila's wealth even more fascinating is the way he presented himself. Despite commanding unimaginable riches, he lived with surprising simplicity. Diplomat Priscus described visiting Attila's camp and seeing him drink from wooden cups while his nobles sipped from cups of gold and silver. His robes were plain, his throne modest, and his meals unadorned. It was not humility, it was intimidation. Attila didn't need to flaunt his wealth because everyone already knew he possessed more gold than any ruler in the region. His simplicity was intentional, a silent message that he did not need luxury to assert power. His wealth existed to strengthen the empire, not to decorate himself. And so the treasure grew year after year, battle after battle, negotiation after negotiation. a treasure so vast that ancient writers described it as beyond calculation. A fortune that terrified Rome, enriched the Huns, and became the lifeblood of an empire that seemed unstoppable until the moment everything changed. The death of Attila the Hun in 453 AD was not just the end of a ruler, it became the beginning of one of history's greatest mysteries. From the moment word spread across the empire, the Huns were thrown into a frenzy of ritual, secrecy, and grief unlike anything seen before. Attila was not a king to them. He was the embodiment of their destiny, the man who united tribes, commanded nations, and shook the foundations of Rome. And when a leader of that magnitude died, his burial had to be something extraordinary, something worthy of legend, fear, and eternal protection. According to ancient chroniclers, the Huns prepared a funeral unlike any other. They believed Attila had been chosen by the gods, and his body could not be laid to rest in an ordinary grave or a simple mound. His death called for a burial so secretive, so sacred, that no enemy, no rival, and no outsider would ever discover it. This is where the story of the three coffins emerges, a tale repeated for centuries but never proven. They say Attila's body was placed first into a coffin of iron, symbolizing his strength in war, then into a coffin of silver, representing his alliances and diplomacy, and finally into a coffin of pure gold, representing the immense wealth and power he amassed during his rule. Yet the story does not end with the coffins. The Huns believed that Attila's grave had to protect not just his body, but everything he represented: his weapons, his royal insignias, his sacred relics, and possibly a portion of the immense treasure he accumulated. Anything he used in life, anything that carried spiritual or political significance, may have been buried with him to ensure that no successor could claim his authority or exploit his legacy. To the Huns, burying these objects wasn't wasteful. It was essential. Attila's belongings were extensions of his power, and they could not be allowed to fall into the hands of enemies who might use them to weaken the empire. But the burial became even more mysterious when the Huns reportedly executed every man who took part in the ceremony. This chilling act was not cruelty, it was strategy. If no one remained alive to reveal the location of the tomb, then the resting place of Attila would remain hidden forever. But the question that has haunted historians is, did this event actually happen as written, or was it a myth created to explain why no trace of Attila's grave has ever been found? Then there is the most dramatic part of the legend, the part that captures the imagination of treasure hunters even today. Some ancient accounts claim that the Huns diverted a river to hide Attila's burial. They supposedly redirected the waters, dug a hidden chamber into the dry riverbed, placed the coffins and the treasures inside, and then allowed the river to flow back over it. If true, this would make Attila's tomb not just hidden but nearly impossible to locate. And it raises more questions. Which river was it? The Danube, the Tisa, the Krex? Or was it a smaller, forgotten river that no longer exists? Archaeologists have searched for centuries. They've scanned riverbeds, examined ancient floodplains, and explored the Carpathian Basin with modern technology, yet nothing definitive has ever surfaced. No tomb, no coffins, no trace of the enormous wealth said to be buried with him. Some suggest the river burial was an exaggeration or symbolic storytelling, meant to convey the idea that Attila belonged to the earth and sky, not to any single place. Others believe the grave truly exists, but remains untouched beneath layers of sediment, protected by nature and time. Every clue leads to another mystery. Every theory opens a new possibility. Some argue the burial might not have occurred in a river at all, but instead in a hidden valley or beneath a sacred mound, known only to Attila's closest companions. Others propose that multiple decoy locations may have been created to mislead outsiders. But the one thing all accounts agree on is that Attila's burial was meant to remain undiscovered, a secret guarded with absolute loyalty by a people who believe that their king's resting place must never fall into enemy hands. When we talk about Attila and the Huns, most people imagine a whirlwind of warriors on horseback, cities burning, and armies scattering in terror. But behind the thunder of hooves and the smoke of battle lay something far more symbolic, far more mysterious objects that carried the soul of the Hun Empire. These were the relics, sacred items, royal artifacts, and powerful symbols that didn't just represent authority. They defined it. And the most perplexing part is that almost none of them have ever been found. To truly grasp the magnitude of these relics, picture a world with no written Hun history. Everything was passed through stories, rituals, and symbols. Power wasn't demonstrated through palaces or monuments, but through the objects a leader carried. A king's authority was woven into his weapons, his banners, his armor. When a Hun ruler lifted a sword or held a sacred cup, he wasn't just wielding an object, he was invoking lineage, divine favor, and the collective identity of an entire people. These relics were the anchors of their culture, and Attila possessed the most revered of them all. One of the most famous relics associated with Attila was the so-called Sword of Mars, a divine weapon said to have been discovered by a shepherd after his cow stumbled on its exposed tip in the dirt. When the sword was presented to Attila, the Huns interpreted it as a sign from the gods that he was chosen to rule the world. Whether the sword was truly divine or an expertly crafted symbol of power hardly mattered. The belief surrounding it was enough to unite tribes and terrify enemies. Roman historians wrote of it with awe, believing that Attila's military success was tied directly to this sacred blade. And if the legend is true, then this sword is still out there lost, buried, or hidden with Attila himself. But the Sword of Mars was only one piece of the puzzle. There were royal banners embroidered with gold threads, banners believed to carry ancestral spirits. There were ceremonial drinking vessels used during war councils and sacred feasts, crafted not only for function but for prophecy and ritual. Some accounts describe intricate gold plaques fastened to saddles and horse armor, shimmering in the sunlight like signs of divine presence. Every object had meaning, and every meaning held power. Then there were the totemic idol, small carved figures that accompanied Hun armies into battle. These idols represented protection, victory, and the favor of ancient spirits. Losing one was seen as a disastrous omen, while capturing one was considered an act capable of shifting the balance of power. Yet no confirmed idol has been recovered, and their very existence has become a shadow between archaeology and folklore. The Huns also possessed lavish belts made of gold plates, each plate decorated with patterns that told stories of lineage, loyalty, and status. These belts were more than ornaments. They were badges of authority. To wear one meant to be recognized as a leader, a person of influence who commanded respect across tribes. Archaeologists have found fragments of belts attributed to various steppe cultures, but pieces directly linked to Attila or his inner circle remain elusive. Every relic, every symbol, was a key to understanding how Attila governed. His leadership was not based on castles or bureaucracy. It was enforced through rituals, reinforced through ancestral objects, and legitimized through the relics he possessed. That is why many historians believe these artifacts were hidden or buried with extreme caution after his death. Allowing a rival to inherit them could have fractured the empire even more severely than his passing already did. And then comes the biggest question of all: where are these relics now? Some may have been buried with Attila in his secret tomb. Others may have been taken by loyal warriors who fled after the empire collapsed, keeping the relics safe from enemies, but ultimately losing them to time. Perhaps a few lie unnoticed in museum storage rooms, mislabeled or misunderstood. Or maybe they still rest beneath layers of soil across Hungary, Romania, or Ukraine, waiting for the right discovery to rewrite history, to truly understand how Attila's treasure became so vast and how so much of it disappeared. We need to look beyond the battlefield and into the hidden arteries of the ancient world. The Huns were nomads, but they were not wanderers without purpose. Their movements followed patterns, paths, and routes that had existed for centuries before them. These trade routes were the lifelines of wealth, culture, and power, stretching from the borders of China all the way to the markets of Europe. And Attila, more than any ruler before him, learned how to control them like a master strategist. Imagine long caravans snaking across the plains, loaded with silk, spices, furs, gold, iron, and exotic goods brought from distant lands. Traders from the east feared the bandits of the steppe, but they feared the Huns far more. To pass safely through the heart of Hun territory, merchants paid heavy tolls and taxes, some paid in gold. Others offered rare goods or precious metals. These exchanges didn't happen at cities or market squares, but at secretive checkpoints guarded by Hun warriors. And with every caravan that crossed these plains, Attila's treasury grew. But here's what makes it even more intriguing. Unlike settled empires, the Huns could not store their wealth in great stone buildings or fortified quarters. Instead, their treasures were hidden, scattered, and guarded in locations known to only a select few. Archaeologists believe that the Huns maintained a network of temporary encampments and seasonal capitals, each one containing its own treasury. These sites weren't designed to last forever. They shifted as the Huns moved, leaving behind caches of items that may still be buried beneath the soil today. Some of these hidden stashes may have been emergency reserves, treasure buried before military campaigns and meant to be retrieved later. Hiding wealth in the earth wasn't unusual for ancient people, but the Huns took it to another level. They buried gold in the wilderness, marked spots with natural landmarks, and trusted only their closest commanders to remember the locations. As long as the empire stood united, these caches were safe. But when the Hun Empire fractured after Attila's death, the knowledge of these hiding places may have been lost forever. The trade routes themselves also played a role in the mystery. Many of these ancient paths have been forgotten or rerouted over time. Rivers changed course, forests expanded. Entire landscapes shifted. Some places that were once vital trade hubs have disappeared from maps and memory. If Hun treasures were buried near these forgotten crossroads, they could now lie beneath farmland, riverbanks, or even under modern cities without anyone realizing it. There are stories unconfirmed but persistent of locals across Eastern Europe discovering mysterious gold ornaments, pieces of armor or gilded horse trappings while digging wells or plowing fields. Many of these finds never made it into museums. Some were melted down, some were sold quietly, and some were lost again, swallowed by private collections. Each discovery hints at the possibility that far larger hoards remain undiscovered, waiting beneath the ground along routes used by the Huns more than 1,500 years ago. And then there's the Carpathian Basin, the great bowl-shaped region that served as the center of Attila's power. From this heartland, trade routes radiated outward like spokes on a wheel. Whoever controlled this basin controlled the flow of wealth across Europe. Attila understood this better than anyone. He didn't need fortresses to guard these routes. His riders were the fortresses. They struck fear across borders, ensuring that every trader knew who truly ruled the land. But when the empire collapsed, these routes lost their guardians. Armies fought over territories, tribes migrated, and old paths faded as new ones formed. The stashes and hidden treasures left behind by the Huns were abandoned, forgotten by time, and swallowed by the shifting earth. Somewhere along those ancient routes, beneath rivers, plains, and forests, Attila's lost wealth still waits in silence, buried where no map can lead, and no history book can fully describe in the modern era. The search for Attila's lost treasures has become one of the most magnetic archaeological quests on the planet. It's a mystery that refuses to fade, a puzzle that teases explorers, historians, and treasure hunters with promises of gold-laden coffins, sacred relics, and forgotten artifacts hidden beneath centuries of earth and water. And what makes the search so electrifying is that, unlike many ancient legends, the story of Attila's treasure is tied to real events, real locations, and real historical figures, which means the treasure itself might be very real too. Across Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, and the plains stretching toward the Black Sea, teams of archaeologists have spent decades piecing together fragments of Hun activity. They've unearthed burial mounds, battlefield sites, abandoned camps, and scattered remains of royal settlements. But what they've uncovered only deepens the mystery. Small discoveries: a gold belt buckle here, a fragment of horse armor there, a ceremonial drinking horn hint at a larger, more spectacular wealth hidden somewhere beneath the soil. Each artifact is like a whisper from the past, a clue pointing to something greater, something still buried and waiting. And then there are the treasure hunters, using modern technology that ancient chroniclers could never have imagined. With drones scanning vast stretches of land, ground-penetrating radar probing the earth, and magnetometers detecting subtle disturbances below the surface, the hunt has become more scientific than ever before. Riverbeds, floodplains, and ancient waterways are scanned carefully, especially the ones linked to the famous legend that Attila's tomb was buried beneath a diverted river. Expeditions have surveyed parts of the Danube and the Tisa with hopes of detecting disturbances in the sediment disturbances that might reveal the hidden burial chamber, or at least the remnants of an ancient ritual. But the rivers are deceptive. They shift, change course, widen, narrow, and even swallow entire landscapes over centuries. A riverbed from Attila's time might now lie meters underground or might have migrated miles away from its original path. This geological shifting turns the treasure hunt into a riddle mixed with archaeology, hydrology, and historical detective work. Every sediment layer holds secrets, but none have yet revealed the unmistakable signature of Attila's resting place. In rural areas of Eastern Europe, there are stories told by villagers, stories of accidental discoveries made while digging foundations or plowing fields. Stories of finding gold plaques, ornate buckles, or strange metalwork unlike anything seen before. Many of these objects vanish before experts can examine them, sold quietly on black markets or hidden away in private collections. The secrecy surrounding these discoveries fuels speculation that some people may have stumbled upon small, hung caches without understanding their significance. Museums across Europe hold artifacts believed to be connected to the Huns, yet few can be definitively linked to Attila himself. Some archaeologists believe that the most valuable relics were either buried with him or hidden by loyal followers during the Empire's collapse. Others argue that the relics could be scattered across multiple countries, lying beneath fields, forests, and rivers where no one thinks to look. What makes the search so compelling is not just the gold or the relics, it's the story they would tell. If Attila's treasure were found, it could provide answers to some of the greatest historical questions of the 5th century. It could reveal how the Huns organized their wealth, what symbols they held sacred, how their leaders expressed power. It might even rewrite parts of European history, showing us a side of the Huns that has been lost, overshadowed by Roman fear and propaganda. Expeditions continue even now. International teams collaborate on new projects, using satellite mapping, environmental reconstruction, and advanced imaging techniques to identify ancient land formations that match descriptions from old sources. Some are convinced the tomb is near the Hungarian lowlands. Others believe the treasure lies deeper east, near the old routes used by Hun cavalry. And every year, new clues emerge, small, subtle hints that make the search even more irresistible for those who believe that somewhere beneath the layers of time, the greatest treasure of the ancient world waits silently in the darkness. When it comes to Attila the Hun, history is tangled with legend in a way few other figures can match. Sorting truth from myth is like peeling back layers of fear, propaganda, admiration, and imagination that have built up over 15 centuries. To understand Attila's lost treasures, we also have to understand how stories about him grew, mutated, and sometimes spiraled into outright fantasy. And somewhere between these layers lies the real truth, what actually happened, what was exaggerated, and what has yet to be uncovered. Roman writers, terrified of the destruction Attila unleashed on their empire, described him in extremes. To them, he wasn't a man, he was a force of nature. Their accounts portray him as a destroyer, a scourge sent by the gods to punish Rome. But the more the Romans demonized him, the more extraordinary the stories of his wealth became. They wrote of mountains of gold, of endless tribute carts flowing into his camps, of treasure storage so vast it defied imagination. But how much of that was fact, and how much was fear talking? On the other side of the spectrum, some later medieval storytellers, especially in Germanic and Norse traditions, turned Attila into a mythical king, a figure woven into sagas where relics gleamed with magical significance. In these tales, his sword wasn't just a powerful weapon. It was tied to divine prophecy. His treasure wasn't just wealth. It was a sacred hoard protected by curses, dragons, or supernatural forces. These stories, though magnificent, paint a picture that drifts far from the gritty reality of the 5th century. Even the story of Attila's burial becomes complicated when we begin separating myth from truth. The legend of the 3 coffins, iron, silver, and gold, has been repeated for so long that it feels like fact. but no contemporary source from Attila's lifetime mentions this burial ritual. The earliest detailed descriptions come from later historians who may have incorporated symbolism, exaggeration, or even folklore into their narration. The idea of burying a ruler inside multiple coffins isn't unheard of in ancient cultures. But the golden coffin might be less historical fact and more a metaphor for the wealth Attila controlled. The tale of the diverted river adds another layer of mystery. Diverting a river was possible in ancient times, but it was extremely rare and required massive manpower and planning. Could the Huns have achieved such a feat? Yes, but is it the most likely explanation for why Attila's tomb was never found? Perhaps not. Some scholars argue that the river story emerged later as a dramatic explanation for the simple fact that no one could locate his grave. If the tomb was hidden in an isolated valley or buried in a forested mound, the story of a river burial would provide a perfect mythological flourish. The same uncertainty surrounds the relics of Attila's court. Some objects described in ancient texts have never been found, but that doesn't necessarily mean they were mythical. They could have been lost, destroyed, or buried with the dead. Yet the absence of evidence leaves room for imagination to take over, and over time, imagination becomes legend. The hardest part of separating myth from reality is that the Huns themselves left no written accounts. Everything we know comes from outsiders, mostly Romans who had every reason to portray Attila as either a monstrous villain or a supernatural figure. This creates a fog around the past, a fog where historians must use clues, archaeology, and logic to reconstruct what really happened. The reality is that Attila's wealth was immense, but not limitless. His relics were sacred, but not magical. His burial was secretive, but not necessarily mythical. And the treasure hunters who search for his lost hoards today are chasing something that is both tangible and symbolic. Beneath the layers of myth, a real man ruled a real empire and owned real treasures. But those treasures became legends, and the legends grew until they overshadowed the truth. Somewhere between the historian's careful analysis and the storyteller's vibrant imagination lies the real legacy of Attila's treasure waiting to be uncovered piece by piece, clue by clue through the evidence that still sleeps beneath the earth. And so, when we step back and look at everything we've uncovered, the layers of this mystery suddenly feel much deeper than any single artifact, document, or archaeological debate. Across every clue, every contradiction, and every whispered theory, one thing becomes clear. History is never as straightforward as the textbooks make it seem. It's shaped by those who recorded it, filtered by those who survived it, and continuously reinterpreted by those who dare to question it. That's why the unanswered questions still echo today, pulling us into a story that refuses to stay buried. Any of these could completely shift our understanding of ancient civilizations, forgotten gods, and the foundations of belief systems that influenced entire empires. And the more we dig, the more it feels like we re-standing on the edge of something even bigger, something that challenges what we thought we knew about the past. But the real intrigue isn't just in the secrets that were lost. It's in the possibility that some of those secrets were hidden intentionally. Whether for power, control, protection, or simply the fear of what knowledge might unleash, there's a running pattern woven through the entire narrative. Someone always benefits when a story disappears. Someone always gains when a truth is buried. And someone always knows more than they're willing to tell. Yet, even through the gaps and distortions, enough survives to paint the shape of a much larger truth. A truth that suggests ancient societies were far more complex, far more interconnected, and far more spiritually aware than we often give them credit for. A truth that hints at gods who weren't just symbols, but forces tied to the sky, the earth, and humanity's earliest attempts to make sense of existence. A truth that, piece by piece, continues resurfacing challenging scholars, provoking debate, and inviting anyone curious enough to look closer. And that's what keeps this story alive. Not the relics alone, but the pursuit. The chase. The relentless curiosity that pushes us to question why these narratives were shaped the way they were, who shaped them, and what they hoped we would never find. Because every time a new fragment emerges from the sand, every time a forgotten myth reappears in a dusty archive, every time a translation reveals something that contradicts centuries of accepted history, we're reminded that the past is still speaking, still resisting, still fighting to be understood. And maybe that's the real mystery here, not the lost god, not the missing records, not the buried temples, but the idea that history itself is alive, constantly shifting, constantly revealing, constantly challenging us to look past the official version and toward the shadows where the real story waits, piece by piece for those willing to search.